So the opportunity at that point to go out and do something a bit exciting or even dangerous and learn more was quite attractive to me personally.
Hey everyone, welcome to SwitchHubTV. It's your host, Wei and John. Today, we're honored to have Stephen on the show. Stephen is a former research scientist at CSIRO. More recently, he's launched PPB Technology, which aims to be a global leader in point-of-care diagnostics for food, environmental, and health applications. Stephen, welcome to the show. How are you?
How are you, Stephen?
Hi. Look, thank you very much. I'm well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Wei. Thank you, John.
Cheers. Thanks for taking the time. We'll get right to it, Stephen. So if you could just tell us, to provide a bit of context, how did you get into science? You know, why did you get into science? Just tell us a bit about your background.
Well, I suppose when I was really, really little, I wanted to be an astronaut, but I realized I was the wrong nationality for that, certainly back in my day. I was always fascinated by science and biology, actually, in particular. And then going through school, I learned that, I learned the formalities of science. I had a bit of a hard choice back in the 70s, this was, because it's pretty good at physics, chemistry, biology, so what should I choose? And I decided actually that I thought that the big changes were going to come in biology over the next, over my career. So I decided to focus more on the biochemistry rather than the physics area. And I think that's been partly true. And obviously there's been exciting things happening in physics as well. But I think the last 50 years and increasingly over the last 20 years has been the age of biology, with genomics and all the things that have gone with that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? Because so I can see here that you went into the research, so you would have done your undergrad, your honors, PhD. Did you always foresee yourself going into research, or at any point did you think, I want to go into more like commercial applications or like industry, that sort of thing?
Yeah, look, I think early in my career, I was really interested in the discovery bit. And so that was why I was very interested in research and went that more academic route. But I would say once I was finishing my PhD, it was at that point that I was starting to become interested in something a little bit more than publishing, and if you like, changing the world as well. And by that point, I'm doing my PhD in Australia, and what was offered to me was the opportunity to move from the university environment to the CSIRO, with the idea that you do the same sort of research in terms of the quality and the profundity, if you like, but you're doing it with a more targeted fashion to change the world and to make a difference. And that really appealed to me. And I think back then as well, I mean, we're talking a fair while ago, I think back then the distinction between what was going on in a university and what was going on at CSIRO was probably greater than it might be now, where I think there's a lot more emphasis in many universities on the translation and the impact. So that sort of caught up. So that's why I moved to the CSIRO. Now, in terms of, and I think you guys call it the science industry, and I have an issue with calling it that because I think it's very diverse. I think there are many industries that use science. But anyway, rather than going into industry, they're really, I think, you probably recognize this, the pathway into industry R&D is not very clear. It's very clear what the academic pathway is. I mean, that's all laid out for you. So that's one thing. How do you get into industrial research and development? That's one issue. And I think another huge issue is that if you're in Germany, for example, or Europe, or the US, there are far more of those opportunities. But here in Australia, we don't have a really deep, high-tech industrial base. There's obviously a lot of good stuff going on, but just in terms of the amount of it, we'll come to that. So I think that's an issue as well. There aren't as many opportunities here, and they weren't in the past particularly.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you mentioned that, and like you said, we'll get back to that at a later point, which will be relevant to your startup that you're launching. But could you give us a bit of detail in terms of the sort of work that you did at CSIRO, because that was, of course, very instrumental in terms of what you're doing now. And I've heard a lot of, great stories about the work that's being done at CSIRO. So I'd just like to get your personal opinion of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, I mean, CSIRO is a vast organization still to this day with storied history, and so that we could talk for days about all the things that researchers at CSIRO have done. Some very, very smart people and some very, very big impacts. But my experience there was I went to something called the division, because we had divisions then, the division of entomology, because I'd always had a bit of an interest in both biomedical science, but also invertebrates. And so I got I guess my shtick, if you like, was to take some of the things I knew about that were happening more cutting edge in biomedical, or being developed in biomedical, and translate those across it more into the invertebrate, the insect pest control, diagnosis, drug discovery. So over the years, that was the sort of thing I was doing. But I got a very early taste. As I came into the organization, you get grants, different sort of grants from ARC and NHMRC, but you get grants and you do research. It's pretty much how it works. Those grants tend to be more from industrial organizations or consortia of industrial organizations, or consortia, particularly in my case, where I was from the rural industries. So, many of the rural producers pay levies to bodies, and then they will invest the money in research. So obviously to benefit them. So, looking to be very applied. And I had the opportunity early on to bid for a bit of research, which was, or an outcome, if you like, which was to be able to develop a way of distinguishing two different, very closely related species of Lepidoptera, so moths, caterpillars, and their eggs. So these are big pests still to this day, and certainly back in the day, they were big pests of cotton. And to the untrained eye, they were completely indistinguishable, but their response to different pesticides was radically different. And even to the trained eye, until they became adults, you couldn't tell the difference. So when eggs and caterpillars are what eat your crop, so you need to know them. So we simply took, and bear with me, I'm going into a bit of detail, but there's a reason.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's good.
We took immunodiagnostic technologies that had been developed in the 70s and 80s and were being applied in biomedical research and clinical diagnosis, monoclonal antibodies, things like lateral flow tests or Western blots anyway. And we took them across and applied them in a slightly different context in the agricultural area, and that was a world first. But the thing was, we did the research, and then we did some field trials, and then I got the opportunity, and we patented, and we licensed the technology, and then I was able to actually translate that technology over to the manufacturer and then see how it went out into the field and got sold. And then we even got royalties coming back from the licensee, who back in that day was Abbott Laboratories. Back in the day, they had a so-called chemical and agricultural products division, which did things like biological insecticides, and they liked what we were doing because it sort of sat alongside their biological insecticides. The point about that was I got this almost unique chance to look at that whole value chain from here's a problem, what's the idea about how we're going to solve it, deliver on that, and then you think you're finished, but you've only just started, translate that across to a product that somebody's selling, watch it being made and sold. And that was just fantastic for me. I was quite a young scientist and really enjoyed that. And I got a huge buzz out of seeing something that I'd ideated, and I'd obviously worked with a big team of people, in all sorts of fields. So it wasn't, I'd had some of the key ideas, and I acted in terms of the technical side of it as the lead, but, getting that out to the industry, getting adoption. There were other people far more experienced than I was leading that side. It was a fantastic learning opportunity, and I got a real taste for it. And so I've sort of been chasing a bit throughout my career, if you like, because I saw how science could get from the lab out to make a positive difference in the world. Now, the interesting thing about that particular product, it's not sold anymore because it sort of held the gap, and then the transgenic cotton with bacterial toxins, insect-specific toxins actually expressed in the cotton came in, and that made it obsolete. So that technology wasn't needed anymore. But it was out in the market for 7 or 8 years. We did a version for the US market as well. So I had a ball on that. And so I've done some other things. Yeah, go on. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in with a quick question. I don't know if it will be a quick question, Stephen, but you talked about, going through that research process, the technical side, which that was the area that you thrived in, and then going to market with that. Was the part in terms of going to market and monetizing it, was working on that scope of work, did that feel less natural to you versus, because I feel like the research part, the technical side would have been more your area, and then in terms of going to monetize that or putting that out into industry, was that a struggle for you? Can you just explain a bit about your experiences there?
Yeah, okay. Well, I suppose, doing it was hard because I didn't know what to do. But on the other hand, it was very rewarding because I was learning new things all the time. And I was learning things from, patent attorneys. I was learning it from licensing professionals. Who do you license to, and how could you get it out into the market? I was learning about sales and marketing from our commercial partners. I was learning about manufacture and how you translate to manufacture. I was learning about how you introduce a new technology into an industry. The cotton industry is very, as agricultural production goes, a very highly technical and highly capital intensive industry, but still, they're not a research institute, so there are some serious challenges there. So all that learning, I just love learning new things, and that was a superb experience for me. So yeah, whilst it was not something I knew about, it really appealed to me to be able to discover all those new things. Yeah.
So during your time in R&D, what was your challenges while working in the R&D lab?
Well, I'll say one thing which is more about me, and then I'll give you maybe something more generalizable. To start off with, I wasn't a very good bench researcher because the level of concentration and just focus that you need to deliver really good experiments is, as you would know, really high. And I had to work on myself for a while. And I really did that through my PhD to get to the point where I had sufficient attention to detail and perfectionism, if you like, to get it all to work. So I learned that stuff the hard way. Maybe there seemed to me to be some more naturals, but for me it was something I worked at and therefore valued it. But then if I go outside the lab, I find writing easy. I do like working with ideas and manipulating ideas and writing papers. So that bit was probably easier than the actual doing the experiment. I think what I discovered, if we talk about that translation of research into industry, I'm sitting in CSIRO. We not as formally as I would now, but we would talk to industries about what their problems were. We would infer it from what was in the literature, and we would try then to develop solutions, and some of the solutions were good and were adopted. But what we kept coming up against was the problem that in Australia, many of our customers or potential customers for licensed technology were branch offices of multinationals, for example. Yeah. And so trying to get adoption, if you're developing the technology, you're trying to get it adopted by head office in I don't know, in France, give an example, or head office in North Carolina, then that's really hard. Why on earth would they come here? And so I think one of the things I was realizing fairly early on is sometimes there is the need to actually go out and create a company in order to go through the valley of death, because developing it up to a point in a company and then chucking it over the fence, to use the old cliche, to a commercial entity doesn't work. You're still probably a million miles off what they need. And yet in the research institution or university, there is no interest, and the funding mechanisms once you've proved the principle, the money really isn't there, and the interest and motivation isn't there to go that extra mile. So there's that gap, and I think it's true all over the place, but it's particularly hard in Australia. And so I sort of learned that lesson, that you have to think about other ways of crossing that valley, and that learning is something I've forgotten and then relearned over through my career.
Yeah, so that's, I like that you bring that up, Stephen, because it brings up an earlier point in terms of the Australian market having gaps, and it's not just it's in terms of the sciences, it crosses food, beverages, pharmaceuticals, veterinary products, so there's a clear gap, and which is I guess a nice segue into your startup, PPB Technology. So can you just tell the audience a little bit about your startup, and what's the problem that you guys are trying to address? And we just want to have an interesting conversation there.
Yeah. Well, if I give a little bit of a history, and I won't go right back to the beginning, but we had this opportunity and some funding to develop a new chemical sensing technology, and that could be applied in a whole range of fields. And to cut a long story short, we focused on bioinspiration, so saying there are some things that clearly biological systems are doing much better than whatever the current instrumentation is, whether it's an HPLC or an electronic nose or whatever it is. And so we'll draw on the resources and the strategies of nature to engineer better solutions. And the first problem we really got stuck into was actually detecting odors. And we got defense money, defense, that was a technology demonstrator, and some other money around looking for explosives. So can we, and other things, things that people shouldn't have. So can we augment or eventually replace sniffer dogs, because that's all that works, with a chemical sensing technology? And then that allowed us, so the idea is we ask ourselves what actually achieves that outcome, and these are sensing proteins in the noses of dogs, sensing proteins in other organisms, chemical receptors in nematodes and bacteria. That's where we went looking, because they actually have the best molecular fit, and they allowed us to then engineer a system. Then we engineered a system around that, asked ourselves what's the best way of engineering a system around those sensing proteins that have a little Lego kit where we can always read out the signal in the same way, but we can change what it is we're measuring. So that was the basis of this technology we call cyber-tongue. However, in developing, with defense money, developing this really fundamental change in technology, and it was a big leap. We're also looking, well, what other applications are there? And food and health were the ones that sprung immediately to mind.
That's what I was about to ask you.
Yeah. And that was never left my mind. That was always in the mind that if we get this technology up and working, then we can also apply it in these other areas. So that's where we ended up.
Yeah, no, it's, so yeah, you sort of, I think you sort of read my mind a little bit. I like how you started with the example of, using it, I guess, in terms of like almost indirect drug testing or public safety sort of standpoint, and then going into things like food and beverage and environmental applications. So can you just go into those other applications as well, Stephen? Because it's really interesting to me.
Yeah, so I guess I'll say a couple of things about that. The first is that when we went through that process, obviously you write grants, and then there are contracts and licenses and all that. And so one of the things we always did is we will work with these the funding agencies to deliver what they want and need, which was in the defense, national security, or law enforcement areas. But and you know, they funded it, they get the rights to that. But we want to hold on to the rights to use the same technology in applications areas like food safety and health. And so that may seem a trivial thing, but that was one of the things that I and my team defended resolutely throughout, so that at the end of the process, we would be able to go on and have the freedom to go on and do the food and health. So that's maybe the first thing. So what are they? Well, we're talking about, well, maybe talk about what we're not talking about. So you know, if you want to measure the amount of protein, the amount of water, the amount of fat, the amount of sugar in a foodstuff, whether that's milk or grain or whatever it is, there are fantastic spectroscopic techniques out there that do that. But we're talking about, you know, 5% protein, 4% fat, 12% moisture. But there is, and this became clear to us, there are needs to measure things at much lower levels where we have the same requirement for fast, easy, and on-the-spot measurement that we would say in defense and security. And those needs weren't met. So having done what, quite frankly, was the hardest job of all, so sniffing explosives, if we think of, you know, the low-hanging fruit and the fruit at the top of the tree, the sniffing explosives is very much at the top of the tree. It's a really challenging problem. But then some of those food applications are much less challenging, and so that's some of those are the low-hanging fruit. And so pretty quickly we go through this. Some stuff is kept confidential, like know-how. Some things are patented or held confidential until we can patent them. But at the same time, we publish model systems. So that was one of the strategies, because, you know, I've got a team of people, scientists, PhDs, postdocs in particular. They need to publish for their careers. So they were very clever, and we worked with them to work out, well, how can we do demonstrations of this technology that are publishable? And as we did that, then it was the dairy industry came to us and said, oh, you could do these proteases. We have a problem with proteases. Can we talk? So that's how we got into food. And then as you get close to an industry, as I'm sure you guys know,
yeah,
they start to tell you about some of their other problems and share with you the precise details. And so that was the way. It was almost the food industry came to us. We were always open to the idea, but it was through the scientific, open, peer-reviewed publications that some of the more technical people in the industry came to us. Health is an interesting one, because I deliberately, obviously we know that there are potentially great applications of what we're doing in clinical diagnosis. At the same time, we know how complex that field is, how much money you need to get there, how demanding the regulatory hurdles are in that space relative to food. And so we've always been interested in it, but just kept it a bit at arm's length, because we want to get something, particularly once we get into the company, get something up and working and running and generating revenue and being successful, rather than biting off a bit more than we could chew. And the other thing is that, you know, I am not a clinical biomedical researcher in that sense. I don't have a particular disease focus. Now, right now, just so you know, I mean, we're actually now starting to do some of the initial discussions with clinicians, pathologists, and people in that area, because I think the time will come when we're able to take some fantastic technologies we've developed and apply them in particular areas in human clinical terms. The technical challenges are very similar to what we're doing in food. If I can say to you that if we're going to measure a vanishingly low levels in milk, measuring a specific protease at vanishingly low levels in serum or peritoneal fluid or something is pretty much, you know, a different flavor of the same thing. It's the business system and the regulatory system around it that's different.
How did you first land your first role in the industry?
Oh, I founded a company. So, yeah. And I think that's something, look, it's not easy. And I think, you know, we're in what, I don't call it biotech or deep tech. You know, I have the benefit of having built and led a team that's developed this pretty remarkable platform technology. And it was clear that we came up against the problem I talked about first. So if I could explain it to you, I'm sure you'll understand it. So we've got a couple of different, our first products are different diagnostic tests that are applicable to dairy processing companies. And we talk to them, and we have done for a long time and continuously. And we're looking to cross that valley of death. And I'm now in CSIRO, and I'm talking to them, and they say, well, you know, will you, I won't name names, but will you support us in developing this project? Now they'd look me in the eye and say, Stephen, we want to use this, but our job is putting milk in, you know, cardboard cartons like this. It's not developing technology. So you tell us who we're going to buy it from. Okay. And then you go and talk to the companies that they might buy it from, and well, there's still too much risk involved, because those companies actually they're not interested in radical innovation particularly. I mean, that's not their job. Their job is to make money for their shareholders. They've got some products out there. They'll do little bits of incremental work, and you know, and this wasn't invented here. And are you selling it already? Because if you're not selling it, it's clearly too risky. So again, that was just another way of seeing there is this gap between what you can deliver, however exciting it is in a research laboratory, however applied you think your mindset is, and actually having a commercial product. So then I went, well, somebody's actually got to get out and do a startup to make this happen, because somebody's got to take the risk to cross that. And, you know, we know that lots of people fail doing that, but if we don't try, then there's no chance of succeeding. And there's no chance. I mean, what would hurt me is, you know, I see this technology that we're working with as having vast potential to improve the world and to make money. And I think it would be a real tragedy not to do your very best to deliver on that. And I happened, because of my age, to be able to be, you know, and, you know, I paid off the mortgage and all that crap. I was in a good position to be able to go out and do that, where many of my team, for example, weren't. And so just from a personal point of view, I said I like to learn. And, you know, after 30 years in CSIRO, you know, I've seen every trend go around probably 3 times. I know how it works. I've written a lot of papers. It starts to get a little bit like I've seen this before. So the opportunity at that point to go out and do something a bit exciting or even dangerous and learn more was quite attractive to me personally. So those two things, the need to do something and the willingness and interest in doing it, came together. So that's how I got my first job in a science, you know, industry per se, and it's still a work in progress.
Yeah. I guess I like those. I appreciate those insights, Stephen, because your journey's very different from what the majority of people would experience. But, you know, you did bring home those takeaway messages of, you know, just giving it a go and having persistence. And leaving no stone unturned. We will need to wrap up, so I just want to end with one final question. I don't know if you can summarize this in a minute, but what's the future for PPB?
Well, I'll tell you what I want it to be. I want us to be a global corporation, one of the leaders, like you said at the beginning, in food diagnostics, because there is a set of unmet needs, and they're growing. Just like in medicine, there are some things that have to be done on site. There are many things that don't have to be done on site, but, you know, we could talk about, you know, clearing a line for allergens. You could use a lateral flow test, but very few people in the industry who care about their customers really will trust those things, because we know they're quick and dirty, they're presumptive. So I think we're looking to build this company, build the range of products, and the core of the company I'd like it to stay in Australia, because it's an opportunity to build the knowledge, you know, the knowledge-based industry, the biotech-based industry in Australia, build jobs for essentially provide jobs for the people you're talking to, because I'd like to see a lot more science-based industry, high-tech industry in Australia, because, you know, I'll say one more thing if you'll indulge me. So about 2 years ago, this thing came out, a report that looked at what's called I think it's the Economic Complexity Index. So this looks at countries, you know, how many different industries and different ways of earning money do they have? And it won't surprise you to know that Australia sits, despite being a very, very, very rich country, sits well down that list. I think it was round about round about 80. Don't kill me if I got it wrong, but round about Mozambique, right? We got to change that. And if that was true 24 months ago, we have really learned in the last 2 years that it's vital that we increase the economic complexity and the range of different things and the value add we can do in this country. So that's a little bit of my driving ambition, and yeah, that's it.
No, and I think it becomes even more relevant, especially with the current circumstances of the world and trying to build up like a more scientific, technical base here in Australia.
Yeah. Absolutely. And look, there is a lot there. I've discovered a lot as I've gone on, and we've got some amazing engineers and designers and things like that. And the biomedical industry is great, but we just got to do more and more and more and build on that, get those positive network effects.
Yeah. So we'd like to thank you for your time, Stephen. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for your interest,
just
gentlemen.
a really interesting conversation.